Dear listener, I invite you to engage in a quiet but important reflection. We will talk about how the role of parents has changed over time, and where, in these changes, we sometimes lose sight of the essence. We will discuss the fine line between being a parent friend and a parent boss. Why, despite our good intentions, do we often find ourselves at one of these extremes? And how does this affect us, our children, and the very fabric of intergenerational relationships? We will examine how confused roles hinder a child's personal development and prevent parents from maintaining authority without becoming dictators. Psychologists, philosophers, and sages of the East and West have said a lot about this. We will try to see their point of view and hear our own intonations, where they're distorted and where they sprout into understanding. In recent decades, the parental model has increasingly leaned toward two extremes. Either I want to be my child's best friend or discipline above all else. Each approach has a degree of care, but there's also a risk of imbalance. The desire to be a friend usually stems from a desire for closeness. We want our children to trust us, not hide from us, not lie to us. It is important for us to feel connected, to hear their thoughts, to participate in their lives. But friendship is a relationship between equals. And parenting, by definition, is not equality, but guidance. A true friend does not teach or restrict. They are not responsible for the development of another. A parent, however, must be. If mom or dad completely merge with the image of a friend, they lose the verticality that a child needs as a support. The boundaries become blurred. The child begins to intuitively feel that the leader of the pack is missing. And this causes anxiety, even if everything seems harmonious on the surface. On the other hand, there is the parent who is a boss. Strict, demanding, unyielding. They demand obedience and do not tolerate objections. In his system, everything is clear, but there is little life. This approach can raise an obedient child, but not necessarily a happy or confident one. Inside, such a child feels either fear or protest. He may outwardly obey, but inwardly, he closes himself off and later either breaks the bond or transfers this same model to his own children. Psychologist Daniel Siegel emphasizes, optimal parenting is a combination of warmth and structure. That is, not extremes, but a mature balance, where the parent knows how to listen, but also how to guide, where there is respect, both for the child's feelings and for the rules that are necessary for their development. True closeness is not equality of roles, but respect for differences. A child needs a parent who is not afraid to be themselves, firm but warm, leading but not oppressive, present but not dissolved, the psychological mechanism where it all comes from. When a parent strives to be too good, it is rarely about the child. More often, it is about the adult's unresolved fears. This is especially evident in those who experienced emotional detachment, coldness, or strict control in childhood. Such parents often unconsciously make a promise to themselves. My child will not feel the way I felt. And so begins an internal pendulum swing, from authoritarian to permissive. But there is a downside to this anything-goes approach. Excessive leniency often hides fear. Fear of being rejected, of losing love, of becoming bad in the eyes of the child. The parent abandons their role as an adult and adapts, trying to please, blurring boundaries. It seems like care, but in reality, it is a lack of support. Children, by their very nature, need clear boundaries. Not only do they create a sense of security, but they also help children understand that the world is predictable and structured, that there are limits within which they can explore, grow, and make mistakes. When these boundaries are absent, the psyche becomes overwhelmed. Where freedom ends, anxiety begins. Research by American psychologist Lawrence Steinberg confirms that children raised in an environment where there are no clear rules are more likely to experience emotional instability, behavioral problems, and low self-esteem. They either become hyper-responsible, taking on the role of an adult, which is destructive to a child's psyche, or they become chaotic and rebellious, testing the limits of what is permissible. Moreover, when a parent is afraid of being inconvenient for their child, they convey an anxious message to them. I depend on you. I am afraid of your judgment. This changes the dynamics of the relationship. The child loses the feeling that there is someone nearby who can cope, endure, and guide them. They are left alone with a choice they are not yet ready to make. True parental maturity lies not in the desire to please, but in the ability to endure temporary misunderstanding for the sake of long-term trust. Setting boundaries does not mean being harsh. It means being reliable. After all, it is clarity that breeds security, not attempts to earn love through endless softness. The hidden motivations of parenthood. At first glance, parenthood is all about love, care, and responsibility. But if you dig deeper, it becomes clear that our motives are not always as pure as they seem. Often, control hides behind care, unfulfilled ambitions hide behind the desire to give the best, and insecurity and fear of loneliness hide behind anxiety. Parenting is a powerful psychological process in which unconscious layers of personality surface. We may demand achievements from a child, not because they need them, but because we have an unfulfilled dream inside us. I couldn't do it, let them do it. Or vice versa, I wasn't praised. I will make sure that my child is proud of me. This seemingly sincere desire to help often hides the projection of one's own dissatisfaction. It is no longer about the child. It is about the parent, their past, their shadows. Psychologist Carl Jung called the parts of the personality that are repressed into the subconscious but continue to control behavior shadows. He wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is especially noticeable in parenting. We often do not realize why a certain behavior of a child annoys us, why we insist on some things and turn a blind eye to others. Example, a mother gets annoyed when her son is lazy and does nothing. But in reality, she has a traumatic belief from her past. Only through hard work can you earn love. In this case, the son becomes a mirror of her own unresolved pain. Instead of contact, pressure arises, and this destroys trust. Another case is when a parent is afraid of loneliness and therefore unconsciously ties the child to themselves. They do not let go, do not allow independence, masking this as care. The adult seems to be doing everything for the best, but in reality, they are keeping the child close so as not to be left alone with their own emptiness. In this case, the child feels guilty for every step they take away. Emotional bondage, fear of disappointment, and the inability to choose are formed. Therefore, one of the main challenges of mature parenting is to see your own shadow and not let it dictate the rules. This requires inner work, self-observation, honesty with yourself, and sometimes the help of a psychologist. A mature parent asks themselves, does the child need this, or do I? Am I helping, or am I fulfilling myself through them? Do I want to be there for them, or am I afraid of being alone? The answers to these questions can be painful, but it is with them that true liberation begins for both the parent and the child. The role of trauma in parental childhood, a profound influence on parenting style. When we talk about parenting, it is impossible to ignore the fact that every adult comes to this role with their own baggage, both light and dark. Parenting often turns out to be a mirror that reflects not only the current reality, but also the wounds of childhood. The experiences that parents had in their childhood shape their internal attitudes, fears, and reactions, and, more importantly, influence how they build relationships with their own children. Traumatic or painful experiences in the past are often unconsciously inherited. Parents may not notice how they repeat the behavior patterns of their own parents. Harsh punishment, coldness, emotional detachment, or conversely, overprotection and control. Sometimes it seems as if an invisible thread is passed down from generation to generation, connecting and at the same time limiting freedom. Such mechanisms operate on a subconscious level. A person does not realize why they act in a certain way, but inside they feel the need to be a good parent, often through the prism of their own experience, in order to correct or make up for the mistakes that were made with them. The result is a complex process. On the one hand, there's a desire to give the child the best and avoid the same mistakes. And on the other, there's an unconscious reproduction of the very patterns from which one wants to escape. It's like walking in circles. The parent wants to break the chain, but doesn't know where exactly it broke. Often, it is this uncertainty that creates internal tension, irritation, and misunderstanding in the relationship with the child. For example, if a parent grew up in an atmosphere of constant criticism and expectations of perfect behavior, they may unconsciously demand the same from their child, believing that this is the way to raise a strong personality. But the child perceives such criticism differently, as a lack of love and acceptance. Or, conversely, a parent who has experienced emotional rejection may be inclined to be overprotective and controlling, fearing losing the connection. But such excessive care prevents the child from learning independence. Understanding that parenting style is not just a choice, but a complex tangle of experiences and unconscious factors, helps us view our reactions with greater tolerance. It is important not only to observe our behavior, but also to look deeper into the places where old wounds and unfinished stories lie. Only then is it possible to break the chain and build relationships based on awareness, freedom, and genuine connection. Expectations versus acceptance. How to let go of projection and see the real child. One of the most difficult challenges in parenting is the ability to distinguish between your own expectations and the real, living child. We often unconsciously project our dreams, fears, and unfinished scenarios onto our children. And this is precisely what becomes a source of conflict and misunderstanding. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "Man is something that must be overcome." A parent who realizes this understands that their task is not to mold their child in their own image, but to accompany the process of their development, to accept their uniqueness, even if it goes against their own plans. Psychologists call this projection, when we see in a child not the child themselves, but a reflection of our own hopes and fears. For example, a mother dreams of her daughter becoming a doctor because she herself did not fulfill her professional potential. The child, however, may be drawn to art or another field. Such misunderstanding gives rise to internal resistance, emotional breakdowns, and distance. How can we learn to let go of projection? First and foremost, through awareness. It is important to ask yourself questions. What do I want from my child? Where does this come from? Is it their desire or mine? The second step is to listen carefully and observe the child without judgment or pressure. You need to see their interests, their character, their fears and joys, without trying to fit them into a mold. When a parent accepts a child as they are, rather than how they would like them to be, true freedom begins for both the parent and the child. The child feels seen and heard and grows up in an atmosphere of trust. The parent, in turn, stops fighting against the wind, which cannot be changed, and finds inner peace. This path is not easy. It requires courage and honesty. But it is precisely this path that opens up space for genuine relationships, where expectations are replaced by respect and control is replaced by support. What is more difficult for you? Letting go of your expectations or accepting your child with their uniqueness? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience is important. Destructive scenarios in parenting. How harmful attitudes affect both sides. In the lives of many families, there are certain attitudes and scenarios that shape not only expectations, but also significant emotional and psychological burdens on parents and children. Let's look at 3 of the most common ones that can be destructive. The first is when a child is perceived as a project. Parents invest not only love and care in them, but also specific plans, often unconscious, related to achievements, success, and social realization. In such a scenario, the child becomes a blank slate onto which the desires of others are projected. As a result, the child loses their individuality and develops an internal conflict between who they want to be and who others want them to be. For the parent, this becomes a source of constant control and disappointment. And for the child, it becomes a source of internal tension and feelings of inadequacy. The second destructive scenario is the child as a support in old age. Here, the parent unconsciously shifts the responsibility for their emotional well-being in the future onto the child. This attitude often stems from a fear of loneliness and a feeling of being unnecessary. The child becomes a source of stability and support, but at the same time loses the opportunity to build their own life freely. For the parent, this is also a heavy burden. The fear of being alone pushes them to be overly protective and have expectations that are difficult to meet. The third scenario is the child as the only meaning of life. This is a very strong mindset that makes parenting the center of an adult's entire existence. Outwardly, this may look like unconditional love and self-sacrifice, but inside, it often hides a fear of loss and dependence on the child. In this situation, both the parent and the child find themselves in a close emotional bond that deprives them of freedom and can lead to emotional burnout and conflict. In all three cases, both the parent and the child are hostages to a scenario that destroys natural boundaries and hinders development. The child cannot become a free personality, and the parent cannot find inner balance and peace. Awareness of these attitudes is the first step toward changing relationships and creating space for healthy development and mutual respect. What to do if it seems that time has been lost, restoring relationships, and starting dialogue in adulthood. Sometimes it seems that the relationship between parents and adult children has reached an impasse, and it is impossible to change anything. Past grievances, misunderstandings, years of silence, or conflict can create the feeling that the door is closed forever. However, even when it seems that much has been lost, the path to restoring relationships is always open, if there's a desire and willingness to work on oneself and one's interactions. The first step is to acknowledge one's own share of responsibility and accept that the past cannot be changed, but the present and future can be. This means stopping blaming each other and starting to accept the situation as it is, with all its complexities and imperfections. An adult, whether a parent or a child, can initiate dialogue by showing openness and a willingness to listen. It is important to remember that restoring trust is a gradual process and takes time. Do not expect instant results or complete forgiveness right away. Often, small steps are enough. Honest conversation, acknowledging mistakes, showing care without conditions or expectations. This could be a letter, a phone call, a walk together, anything that allows you to start moving towards each other. Revisiting roles is key. In adulthood, relationships change. Parents are no longer so much guardians as supporters and advisors, and children are independent individuals with their own experiences and outlook on life. Respecting this new dynamic helps reduce tension and open up space for dialogue where everyone hears each other. In addition, it is important to learn to listen without the desire to immediately respond or justify yourself, but simply to hear the emotions and words of the other person. This creates a feeling of acceptance and reduces barriers of misunderstanding. In such conditions, it becomes possible to gradually build new relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. Even if the relationship has been tense for a long time, it does not mean that all is lost. As long as there is life, there is a chance for change. The main thing is to start. Take the first step, which may be the beginning of a new stage, a more mature and closer relationship between parent and child. Intergenerational dialogue as a path to personal growth for the parent. When we talk about parenting, we often focus on what we, as parents, give our children: knowledge, experience, support, love. But few people think about the fact that the parenting process is a two-way street that inevitably changes the parent as well. The child becomes not only the object of upbringing, but also a powerful mirror that reflects our strengths and vulnerabilities, our true selves. Intergenerational dialogue is not just an exchange of words and rules. It is a profound process in which parents learn patience. Patience not as tolerance for a child's whims or mistakes, but as the ability to accept imperfection, our own and that of others. Children show us our limits, the places where we feel uncomfortable, where old fears or unhealed wounds come to the surface. It is through such moments that real growth occurs, not external, but internal. Being a parent means revealing your vulnerabilities and not being afraid to acknowledge them. With their unpredictable behavior, needs, and feelings, children seem to take us out of our comfort zone and force us to rethink our established views. This is not always easy. Sometimes it is painful. But it is this process that teaches us flexibility and humility, and most importantly, true presence. Finally, parenting is a constant process of change and transformation. Children encourage us to change, to rethink our values and beliefs, to go beyond our own ideas about life and happiness. We learn to listen more, control less, and see not what a child should become, but who they are now. Thus, parenting is not only what we give to our children, but also the path by which we ourselves become better, deeper, and wiser. This dialogue between generations is a priceless gift, an opportunity for self-discovery and inner growth that continues throughout life. Silent education, the power of example and silence in shaping personality. We often think that education consists of conversations, instructions, and rules that parents impart to their children. But what we show through our actions, our behavior, and our reactions is no less influential, and sometimes even more so. Parenting by example, or silent parenting, shapes a child's internal map of the world in ways that words sometimes cannot convey. Children, especially at a young age, absorb everything like a sponge. They watch how their parents treat others, how they react to stress, how they behave in conflict situations, how they show care or solve problems. This unconscious learning becomes the basis of their values, models of interaction, and attitudes toward themselves and those around them. Therefore, even the strictest speech loses its meaning if parents demonstrate different behavior. Silent education is like a garden that grows on its own, but in soil prepared by the parent. If the soil is respect, calmness, and openness, the child's roots will be strong and the branches flexible. If the soil is irritation, constant dissatisfaction, and double standards, the plant will grow crooked, even if you try to fix it from above. Realizing this, it is important to think not only about what we say, but also how we live. It often happens that parents demand honesty, but hide their own emotions. They teach respect, but show irritation themselves. The child senses these inconsistencies and learns from them more than from words. Silent parenting requires parents to work on themselves, to become examples of the qualities they want to see in their children. It is a process of constant self-observation, awareness, and patience. When parents are able to manage their emotions and show respect for themselves and others, the child receives a powerful foundation for developing a healthy personality. Thus, education by example is the most reliable, profound, and effective school in which a child learns to live, love, and interact with the world, not just by listening to words, but by feeling their living response in the actions of loved ones. Examples from life. Often, the most ordinary situations illustrate how parental roles can go off course. Take the image of a mother who wants to be her daughter's friend. From a young age, she instills in her daughter, "You can trust me. Talk to me about anything. I will always understand." The girl grows up believing this, but as soon as the conversation turns to her personal life, to choices that do not coincide with her mother's expectations, the tone changes. Mom no longer listens. She interrupts, lectures, moralizes, worries, and subtly pressures her daughter. The girl withdraws. Her conclusion: openness is dangerous. It's better to keep things to myself. And as an adult, she may be afraid of trusting relationships because she has learned that trust is followed by control. Or another example, the father is a commander. The house is ruled by order, schedules, and authority. At first glance, there is stability. But the child has no right to make mistakes, no opportunity to discuss, argue, or find their own way. The father believes life is discipline. Conversations only weaken it. The son or daughter grows up and either continues to be obedient but internally unfree, or leaves, breaks ties, and everything that was invested is lost in distance and protest. There is a third, more hidden scenario: the parent who does not interfere. He does not scold, punish, or take a deep interest. He gives complete freedom, thinking, I don't want to be like my parents. Let the child decide for himself who to be. But here the problem lies elsewhere. Emotional inaccessibility hides behind external freedom. The child does not get the most important thing, the feeling that his life is truly important to someone. One adult woman recalled how, at the age of 14, she told her mother for the first time that she was afraid of thoughts about the future. Her mother waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense, everyone feels that way, it will pass. Since then, the girl has not shared anything serious. This response became a lesson. Your feelings are not important. And then it became a habit. It is precisely these everyday episodes that shape internal scenarios for years to come. Not loud scandals, but minor misunderstandings, unstable boundaries, unspoken phrases that stick in a memory like, I am alone, no one hears me, no one accepts me for who I am. That is why it is so important to monitor not only your words, but also your intonation, reactions, and silence. Not to be perfect, but to be real. Because it is precisely from a multitude of such episodes that trust is built or broken. Parents as gardeners, creating conditions for the natural growth of a child. Instead of trying to mold a child in their own image, like a sculptor carving a finished form out of stone, parents can become gardeners, those who care for the soil, watering and lighting, so that the seedling can grow and develop freely at its own pace and in its own direction. This metaphor helps us to understand more deeply what it means to be a true guide in a child's life, not suppressing their individuality, but helping it to unfold. A gardener does not dictate how a flower grows, nor does he force it to branch out as he wishes. He only creates optimal conditions, loosens the soil, removes weeds, waters, exposes it to the sun, and protects it for pests. A parent who takes on this role focuses on support rather than control, on understanding the unique needs and talents of the child, rather than imposing their own expectations. In life, this means that it is important to observe, notice, listen, and not rush or pressure. When parents strive to shape the perfect child, trying to mold them according to their standards, they risk stifling their natural spark, creative energy, and individuality. Such attempts often cause resistance, internal conflict, and a feeling of lack of freedom in the child. The gardener waits patiently, understanding that each sprout is unique. Some flowers bloom early, brightly, and luxuriantly, while others bloom slowly but surely. It is important not to compare, but to appreciate every growth, every manifestation of life, even if it does not conform to generally accepted norms. This approach requires awareness and humility from the parent. The ability to let go of the desire to control everything and accept the child as they are. This does not mean abandoning parenting or rules, but rather parenting based on love, respect, and understanding. In this way, parents become not jailers, but helpers on a journey, not creators of form, but guides through life. This is where true strength lies, in creating a space where children can fully reveal themselves and find their way in the world freely and confidently. Final conclusion. The role of a parent is not to control everything or to be one of the gang. True strength lies in the ability to be a stable reference point. Not perfect, not infallible, but real. To be someone who knows how to say no with respect and yes without fear of rejection. Someone who can lead without suppressing and listen without losing themselves. As Carl Jung wrote, the greatest influence on a child is not words, but the unlived life of their parents. Therefore, parenting is not so much about rules as it is about the inner state of the adult, about their maturity, honesty, ability to withstand complex emotions, both their own and their children's. If we learn to be flexible but stable, sensitive but not dissolved, we will give our children more than just an upbringing. We will give them an inner compass that they can follow in life. How do you feel about your role in your relationship with your child? What is more difficult for you? Maintaining boundaries or letting go? Share your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps your experience will be of support to another parent. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.